Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today's topic is one that's been on my mind a lot lately.
Oh, yeah.
It's this whole thing about anti-Semitism on college campuses, it seems like. Well, we hear about it more and more these days.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been in the headlines.
And we're actually going beyond just the headlines today.
Oh, okay. Even better.
Yeah, we've got this new report from the organization Stop Antisemitism, and they actually graded 25 different universities on how they're handling this whole issue.
Wow, 25. That's a pretty significant sample size. So, are they just looking at how many incidents there are, or is it more in depth than that?
It's way more than just counting incidents. It's like a whole deep dive into their policies, how they respond to things, how they support Jewish student groups, the whole nine yards.
That makes sense. I mean, just looking at the number of incidents wouldn't really give you the full picture, would it?
Exactly, exactly. And what's really crazy is that some big name universities like Cornell and the New School got an F.
An F. Wow, that's pretty harsh. I mean, those are pretty prestigious schools. What were they doing, or I guess not doing, to get such a low grade?
Well, at Cornell, there was that whole thing with that student, Patrick Day, who got like almost 2 years in prison for those online threats.
Right, right. The murder threats. Yeah, that was a pretty disturbing case.
And then there's Professor Russell Rickford, who, um, he basically said he was happy about the Hamas attacks.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's just beyond the pale. But I guess the report is saying that it goes beyond just those individual cases, right?
Yeah, it's like they're saying there's a pattern of not taking anti-Semitism seriously enough.
That's concerning. And they connect this to a broader trend, right? Like a rise in anti-Semitism on campuses across the country.
Exactly, and they even point to groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP.
SJP. Okay, so how are they connecting SJP to anti-Semitism? I mean, they're a pretty vocal group, I know that, but isn't their focus more on criticizing Israeli policies?
Right, right, and criticism of Israel is one thing, but the report argues that SJP often crosses the line.
Crosses the line how?
Well, like they've been linked to those encampments. Remember those? The ones that popped up on a bunch of
Oh,
campuses?
right, those encampments, yeah. Weren't some students even arrested at one of those?
Yeah, at Brown University, I think. And the report suggests that SJP was a big part of organizing and sustaining those things.
Huh, interesting. So these weren't just peaceful protests.
Well, peaceful is one thing, but when you're disrupting campus life and like intimidating other students, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like this report is saying that anti-Semitism on campus is more organized than just a few random incidents.
That's what they're suggesting, yeah. It's of a movement that's gaining traction, and they're calling on universities to really step up and address it.
Well, and it's not just Cornell, right? You said the new school also got an F.
Oh, yeah, and their situation, well, it's even worse, according to the report. Like, a full 75% of students at the new school said they've personally experienced anti-Semitism.
75%, that's just mind-blowing. That's like three-quarters of the Jewish students there.
And it goes beyond just those individual experiences. The report says that, like, 95% of Jewish students at the new school feel unwelcome in a lot of places on campus.
Wow, 95%. I mean, think about what that does to a student, you know? To feel like you don't belong, like you're not safe in a place that's supposed to be all about learning and growing.
Right. It's just awful. And it's having a real impact.
Uh,
Get this, 83% of Jewish students at the new school said they wouldn't recommend the school to other Jewish students.
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement. It's like they're putting out a warning, like, hey, this isn't a safe space for us.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. And, it's 2024. You'd think we'd be further along than this.
I know, right? You'd think we'd be moving towards a more tolerant and inclusive society, not backsliding
Yeah.
like this.
And it's not just a campus problem, right? The report connects this to what's happening in society as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. The Anti-Defamation League, they reported a huge increase in anti-Semitic incidents across the U.S. in 2023, like a 140% increase.
140%. That's just staggering. So what are universities doing about all this?
Well, that's That's where it gets really interesting. The report says there's this disconnect between what universities say they're doing and what Jewish students are actually experiencing.
So, like, they're talking the talk, but not walking the walk.
Pretty much. A lot of universities have these diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, but a lot of Jewish students feel left out of those efforts.
Like, there's a blind spot when it comes to anti-Semitism.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the Stop Antisemitism report is so important, you know?
Yeah.
It's shining a light on a problem that's often, often overlooked.
So they're not just pointing fingers, they're offering some solutions, right?
Right. They have a bunch of recommendations for how universities can do better.
Okay, so let's dive into those recommendations. What are some of the things they're suggesting?
Well, first and foremost, they say universities need to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism,
The IHRA.
the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's basically a clear, internationally recognized definition of what anti-Semitism actually is.
That seems pretty basic, right? Like, wouldn't every university want to have a clear definition?
You'd think so, but it's actually been pretty controversial.
Really? Why?
Well, some people argue that it's too broad or that it could infringe on free speech.
Free speech. But wouldn't you say that student safety should come first?
That's the argument that the report is making, yeah. They're saying that universities have a responsibility to protect their students from all forms of bigotry, and that includes anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, I guess. Universities need to be places where you can debate ideas freely, but they also need to be safe spaces for everyone.
Absolutely, and that's why this whole issue is so complex.
So it's not just about the IHRA definition, right?
Right.
What other recommendations do they have?
Well, they also talk about establishing Jewish affinity groups, providing more support for Jewish student organizations, and incorporating anti-Semitism education into their diversity training.
So it's like a whole package, a whole approach to tackling this problem.
Exactly. And, it's not all doom and gloom. The report actually highlights some positive examples, too, like universities that are doing a really good job of creating supportive environments for their Jewish students.
Oh, that's good to hear. So, like, what are they doing differently? What does an A grade actually look like?
Well, for one thing, they're being proactive. They're not just waiting for something bad to happen before they take action. They're partnering with Jewish organizations, hosting events, and really making an effort to educate their communities about anti-Semitism.
So it's not just about having policies. It's about creating a culture where anti-Semitism is just not tolerated.
Exactly. And they're also making sure that Jewish students are included in their diversity and inclusion initiatives. They're not just an afterthought.
That's so important because ultimately this is about creating a campus environment where everyone feels safe and respected.
Right. And it's not just about campuses, is it? This whole issue of anti-Semitism, it's a reflection of what's happening in the wider world.
Yeah, that's what's so scary about it. It's like this ancient hatred that just keeps rearing its ugly head.
And it's up to all of us to push back against it. Universities have a role to play, for sure, but it's also about individuals speaking out, challenging bigotry wherever we see it.
So it's really a collective effort. We all have a part to play in making the world a more tolerant and inclusive place.
Absolutely.
Well, I think this is a good place to pause for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
When we come back, we'll dive deeper into the findings of another survey, this one from Alums for Campus Fairness, and we'll talk about some of the potential solutions to this really complex and challenging issue.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. It's interesting, right? We were just talking about those universities that got A grades.
Yeah, the ones that are actually doing a good job of supporting their Jewish students.
Right, and it makes you wonder, what are they doing that these other schools aren't? What's the secret sauce?
Well, the report actually dives into that a bit. They say that these A-grade universities are taking a much more proactive approach.
Proactive, huh? So they're not just waiting around for something bad to happen.
Exactly. They're partnering with Jewish organizations, they're hosting educational events about anti-Semitism, and they're really making an effort to create a campus culture where that kind of bigotry just isn't tolerated.
So it's not just about, having a policy on paper. It's about actually putting those words into action.
Yeah, and it's about making sure that Jewish students feel like they're really part of the campus community, like their voices are being heard.
Which brings us back to that other survey we wanted to talk about, the one from Alums for Campus Fairness.
Oh, right. That one had some pretty disturbing findings too, didn't it?
It did. I mean, just to recap, they found that 44% of students rarely or never feel safe identifying as Jewish on campus.
44%. Wow. So almost half of the students feel like they have to, like, hide who they are.
Yeah, and it goes even deeper than that. Remember that stat from the Stop Antisemitism report, the one that said 43% of Jewish students hide their Jewish identity out of fear?
Yeah, that was a real gut punch. I mean, it's 2024, you know?
Yeah.
Students shouldn't have to feel like they have to go back in the closet because of their religion.
Exactly. And when you connect that to the findings about DEI failures in the other report, well, it paints a pretty bleak picture.
The DEI, you mean diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, remember 67% of Jewish students said they felt excluded from their school's DEI initiatives?
Oh, right, right. I mean, it's almost like there's a blind spot when it comes to anti-Semitism, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's just not on the radar for a lot of these diversity efforts.
That's exactly what it seems like. And that's why that recommendation to adopt the IHRA definition is so important.
The IHRA definition. Remind me what that is again.
Right, so the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, they came up with this working definition of anti-Semitism.
Oh, right, right. And some people were saying that's controversial or something?
Yeah, there's been some pushback. Some people say it's too broad, or that it could be used to stifle criticism of Israel.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see how that could be a concern. But don't you think that student safety should be the top priority?
That's the argument the report is making, yeah. They're saying that universities have a responsibility to protect their students from all forms of hate, and anti-Semitism is definitely included in that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to find that balance, right, between
Mm.
protecting free speech and making sure that everyone feels safe and welcome on campus.
Exactly. It's a complex issue, for sure. The bottom line is that Jewish students are facing real threats, real harm, and universities need to do more to address that.
Okay, so besides the IHRA definition, what else are they recommending?
Well, they also talk about things like establishing Jewish affinity groups, giving more support to Jewish student organizations, and incorporating anti-Semitism education into their diversity training programs.
So it's really about taking a multi-pronged approach, you know,
Yeah.
hitting it from all angles.
Exactly. And it's not just about reacting to incidents after they happen. It's about creating a campus culture where anti-Semitism is just not acceptable in the first place.
And where Jewish students feel like they can be themselves,
Hmm.
you know, without fear of harassment or intimidation.
Absolutely. That's the goal. And it's not just about campuses, is it? This whole issue of anti-Semitism, it's a reflection of what's happening in society as a whole.
Yeah, that's what's so scary about it. It's like this ancient hatred that just keeps coming back.
And it's up to all of us to stand up and fight against it, whether it's on campus or in our communities or online. We can't just stand by and let this happen.
So it's really about like personal responsibility. We all have a role to play in making the world a more tolerant and inclusive place.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message to end on, don't you think?
So, we've talked a lot about the problem of anti-Semitism on campus, and it can feel pretty overwhelming, to be honest. Like, where do you even begin to tackle something like this?
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue, no doubt about that. But I think one of the key takeaways from these reports is that, even small actions can make a difference.
Okay, so what are some things that, like, regular people can do? I mean, students, faculty, alumni, people who want to be part of the solution.
Well, for students, I think it starts with education. Take the time to learn about anti-Semitism, the different forms it can take.
Because it's not always obvious, right?
Right. It can be really subtle sometimes. But once you're aware of it, you can start to recognize it when you see it, and then, you can do something about it.
Like what? What can you actually do if you see something happening?
Well, don't be afraid to speak up. Challenge those anti-Semitic comments, even if it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah, I know that can be tough, especially if it's like a friend or a professor or someone you respect.
I get it. It can be awkward. But silence can sometimes be interpreted as agreement, like you're okay with what's being said.
That's true. And it's not just about students, right? What about faculty? What can they do?
Well, I think faculty have a responsibility to be really mindful of the language they use in the classroom, the examples they give, the readings they assign.
So it's not just about avoiding like blatant hate speech.
Mm.
It's about being aware of those more subtle forms of bias that can creep into our teaching.
Exactly. And it's about making sure that Jewish students feel safe and included in the classroom, that they can be themselves without fear of being judged or marginalized.
And what about alumni? I mean, they're not on campus anymore,
Yeah.
but can they still make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. Alumni can support Jewish student organizations, they can advocate for stronger policies against anti-Semitism, and they can hold their alma mater accountable for creating a safe and inclusive environment.
So it's really a collective effort, isn't it?
It is. We all have a role to play in pushing back against this hatred.
And it's not just about protecting Jewish students.
Right.
It's about protecting the values that our society is built on: tolerance, inclusivity, respect for human dignity.
Exactly. Those are the values that make a society strong and vibrant. And when we allow hatred to fester, we all suffer.
Well said. And I think that's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. We've covered a lot of heavy stuff today, but I hope you've come away with a sense of, a sense of hope.
Me too. Because at the end of the day, we all have the power to make a difference. Even small acts of kindness, of courage, of speaking out against injustice, those things can have a ripple effect.
So let's all commit to being part of the solution. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.